This is La Lista, a Latinx writers podcast. I am your host, Ruben Mendive, and today I have an extra special guest. Again, reached out to me via Twitter. This is a great way for me to find out new writers, is that they reach out to me so I know who to talk to, who's interested, you know? So we start every podcast by the guests introducing themselves. So just like a quick little intro to who you are, what you do, and how you identify. And this is also so the listener can hear what your voice sounds like.
Hi there. My name is Jason Avalos, and I am a Latin writer, screenwriter, director, and actor. How I identify, I would probably, the simplest thing is I identify as like a first generation Latino American. Mother's from El Salvador, dad's Colombian.
All right, cool.
Yeah.
All right, so that's good. It leads me right to my first question. Sort of where did you grow up? Where did it start?
For me, I was born in New York, but I moved to LA and Long Beach, California, like super early on. Mm-hmm. So I grew up just on the border of Los Angeles, which is Long Beach. And so I consider myself an Angelino. I think some people don't know that Long Beach is part of LA, but yeah, so I grew up there and spent most of my time there.
Okay. And you said you were first generation. So can you talk a little bit about your parents' journey, how they came to the US?
Yeah. So my mother is from El Salvador, and she left El Salvador basically in the 70s, during, there was a lot of war, a little civil war, and she left. She went to New York, and my father came over here with about 7 or 8 brothers and sisters from Colombia during the 70s. So they both kind of came out here from maybe the turmoil of those countries.
Yeah.
And that's how that started.
Yeah, so that's cool. That's sort of what I've been hearing from a lot of people. It's their parents sort of came to this country separately and met here. My parents came together,
Oh, they did?
Yeah. So,
that's awesome.
So it's always
that's
interesting to, how these two different families from two different countries came to New York and then met and then made their own families.
Yes.
Do you know sort of their, about your grandparents and even before then, what their life was like in their countries of origin?
That question actually is really interesting, and I'm only just now discovering the answers to it. I think from even the writing and digging more into my heritage, I'm not super close with either side's families. So, and only now have been getting closer with them. So, my grandfather on my mother's side, worked in the coffee fields in El Salvador. He actually worked there till the day he died, and God bless him, had a little heart attack, and it was way too far to get a ambulance out there in the coffee fields, and he was just kind of, and so anyway, I always think about that in terms of work ethic. I'm like, this guy, did it till he, but I only met him once when he came to Los Angeles and spent a little bit of time with us. So they both came from big families and small towns. And like I said, there was a lot of civil war going on in El Salvador. So I think that her family wanted her to, and she wanted to do something, and make a change. And the other sisters of hers stayed behind. I think a few eventually, but only 1 or 2 maybe ventured to, America, United States. But and then with my father, it was a different story, and basically those kids also came here one at a time just because of like finances. There was finances and strain, and so they sought opportunity here and came over one by one, but they couldn't all just they didn't have it like that. So so they made their way over here, and that grandfather and grandmother, I don't know much about them, so I am now getting closer with that side of the family, which has been really, really wonderful. And so I'm learning more about them as it goes. So it's an odd, strange thing to get closer with your family as you get older, as opposed to farther apart.
Yeah. And I think it might even be easier once you're a little older,
It is.
You sort of start reflecting and looking back on who you are and how you got here.
Right, exactly. Yeah, because I already have, an identity, so I don't have to place it onto something, and it's nice to do it the other way around, kind of.
Yeah. And do you ever go back and visit?
I have not gone back and visit. I'm a horrible, horrible creature. No, but I have a brother on my mother's side who he grew up in El Salvador, and he goes and visits, and I always taunt him every year. This past few years, especially, I'm like, "You're taking me with you, and I want to go and see, see what there is to see." And the same with the Colombian side. I'm actually trying to find someone from the family, one of the families, to go with me, so that I have a little guide there. But it's getting very close. In fact, I think after I have this project I'm working on, and I think after that I'll make a kind of a trip, which will be really cool. But
and that sort of feeds into, even learning about our family one or two generations back, because it's not like, I'm gonna go check out my roots in Tennessee. It's you have to fly to for Colombia, a different continent.
It's far. It's far out. It's not that far, I guess, but it is. And and I don't know what other, I can't speak for anybody else, but as a first generation American, it's been odd because the family, they fought really hard to get here. And that was like, okay, cool. Like, we did that.
Yeah.
And now you guys, being me, like, you guys go and get yours and go and be American and embrace that culture. And kind of, in some ways, the way I grew up was in, just like never look back, look forward, and so that's kind of how that's been my perspective for a long time. And I didn't know anybody really in those other countries. The only people from my family that I did know all lived either here or in LA or Virginia or, Florida. Yeah. So I was like, well, who am I going back there to see?
Yeah.
I don't really know.
Yeah.
It's not, there's nobody back there that I know. Like, it's not like, oh, go back to see your family. Like, I don't know them. Yeah. You know what I mean? And now I'm like an older man. And like, so it's like weird. It's like weird. And it's, so anyway, so that's kind of.
And do you speak Spanish?
I speak it a little bit. But not that much. I speak poorly. Which is another reason why I feel inadequate to go back there. And they will all speak Spanish, and then they will all tell me, why don't you speak Spanish? So I belong in this special circle, and I know that there are some of us that like our first generation, we don't speak fluent Spanish, and we get crapped on. We get shamed. We get like language shamed from our people like all the time about it,
Yeah. And that's not like a question I asked everybody. I just wanted to know if that was also like an obstacle to go visit these countries, because, like you were saying,
I've used it. I think I've used it as an obstacle. Yeah. Although now I'm loosened up about it all, which is, and, but it would be nice to go with like my brother to have like a little bit of easier translation with it. But I've traveled a lot of countries and not known the language and been fine. So, and I know enough to really like hang out. If they want to talk like politics or the details of a novel, okay, I might not. But other than that, I know how to get around and backpack and travel and that kind of Spanish. Like I know that Spanish.
Yeah. No. Again, like you shouldn't feel too guilty.
Yeah.
Because it is that immigrant mentality where it's like you don't look back. Sometimes our like history gets a little lost because our parents are like, I worked really hard to get us here.
Right.
Like it's not a nice story, like immigrants come here because they are looking for a better life and they don't really want to talk about the old one.
Mm-hmm.
And I just went back to Mexico City a couple months ago and I didn't see any family because I didn't want to make because the time it had been like 12 years since I had last gone.
Oh.
And that time it was all about family. I saw, and this is the thing you'll sort of learn, like they're just happy to see you. So I didn't know who was related to me in any way, but nephews and cousins that were in their 30s. And I was like 12 at the time,
Right.
So they're just happy to see you. And this time I didn't see them because it's like you're doing like the tour of Mexico City through your living rooms of your family. And not really the experience I wanted. I'll go back to see them, but I really want to do like a tourist, I wanted to.
Yeah, you want to do like you want a vacation, not like a family thing.
Because it'll eat up your whole time. So it is. I would recommend 2 separate trips to like really just
right.
Because again, they're happy to see you.
Yeah, you're right though. I just went back to I went to Florida very recently and saw people from my dad's side I hadn't seen in like 15, 20 years. And and it was amazing. It was amazing. And some people who hadn't seen me for, a long time, they saw me when I was a kid and stuff. And none of it mattered. And it was great. And it was a lot of fun. And it's that's why I said like the language is hardly a barrier. It's just there's really even when I went back to go see them, I'm like I literally have no reason that I didn't come here. There was what I mean? Like there's no, it's just time and who knows, But,
and so what did your parents do for a living?
What did they do? My mother, she is a CPA. She's an accountant. So she in Long Beach, she actually was she was the accountant and she was one of the managers at like a bowling alley. So she went from there and then she moved into like doing CPA work for like bigger companies for a long time and in San Diego. And my father, he's a union, he's a trash man in New York. So he is there. And I think he's retired now. I think he's been retired for the past few years, but he has been doing that in New York. So that's kind of different worlds.
Yeah, that's actually really cool. Like, because you see like New York garbage men on TV constantly. And so that's sort of what I'm picturing. But also, like, that's such an interesting story, too, to be, like, an immigrant that comes in and is, like, the garbage man in New York City, which is its own separate world, like.
Totally, yeah. And, he, so I think that, they both, like, she's just kind of a brainiac numbers person, and then and he's, slugging it out there, you know what I mean? Just like, and so, but I grew up with my mother, you know what I mean? So, they divorced when I was like 1. So I wasn't very close with him. And we stay in contact, but I'm not very close with him. I'm probably closer to the family that, but anyway, that's as much of the story that I know from what I know about it.
Yeah. So you moved to Long Beach with your mom. Do you have siblings? Do you guys have family out here already, or?
Yeah, I have a half brother who, I consider like my brother,
Yeah.
and that's from my mom's side, and he lives in Long Beach, with his family, and yeah, we're very close, but we actually didn't know. We did not. He was still living in El Salvador until he was 18, and I was about 12. So when he came here, we could not have been more different people.
Yeah.
And that was like in a TV show of itself.
Honestly, an 18-year-old Salvadorian guy goes to live with his family in Long Beach, California.
Yeah.
With his California half brother.
And I was so California. Like, if you can hear it right now, I'm like, what's up, dude? Yeah. Like, it's just like, what is this child?
Yeah.
So that was really funny, and it took us a while to get to a place where we could really connect on certain levels.
And he's like oddly the older brother, but probably more about this country, so
yeah,
it's like a weird dynamic.
It was a weird dynamic. I taught him all his cuss words. Like, I was like, let's get you started, man.
Yeah.
So and now we're as close as humanly possible. It's great.
And what prompted the move to Long Beach for your mom and for you?
I think that was just. I think honestly, it was just. I think just their divorce and them separating. And she was like, you know what? I'm done here. So she was like,
she needs her space.
Yeah, she's like, if Mama needs her space, she's going to LA.
Yeah.
So I think it was something like that. Yeah.
Yeah. And so, what was it like growing up in Long Beach?
Long Beach was amazing.
Yeah.
Long Beach was amazing. It's well, during that time there was I had seen a lot of different things that really impacted my life. It was just Snoop Dogg and like all that era had just been going on. Not to age myself too much, but Snoop Dogg and that whole thing. There was like Sublime and that movement. There was a lot of great bands coming out of that time. There was the LA riots. So I was watching, my favorite places burn down on my balcony with my best friend and our parents, just watching all these buildings burn.
Wow.
So those little things are big things. Those were historic, and they changed who and what I am. I was in a punk band that my friend's older sister would take us to all these like Sublime parties, and
cool.
And so we were way like out of our element, but and it'd be Sublime, it'd be like No Doubt, it'd be a bunch of bands, a bunch of punk bands, and so seeing, and a lot of those bands are still around. Snoop and well, it's not Sublime, but Sublime still plays, and No Doubt, and Gwen Stefani, obviously, and even some of the punk bands like Pennywise, all these bands that came out of there. We really saw this kind of musical movement happen, and we didn't know it at the time, but seeing that definitely influenced my life. It influenced my writing. I was a musician for up until about early 20s. So all of that mixed with the historical elements, the bouncing around. There was this. It is a melting pot in Long Beach, and but it also feels like a very small community. Which is nice. You really get to hang out with, your white friends from Belmont Shore who like their parents might have a boat, which is like some white people shit. You know what I mean? And then you go back to like your area. Like I lived in like Signal Hill for a while, and and there you walk down the street. Remember we played at this park down the street in Signal Hill, and you pretty much had to join the gang or the little junior gang of the main gangs to hang out. So I think I was in a gang called the Mercedes Crips, and up until like 11 or something.
Wow, that's
and,
young.
Huh?
That's young.
Yeah, up until 11.
Yeah,
Yeah,
but
but
still,
I,
like-
I peaked and I was like, I'm done with the gang shit.
Yeah.
And like, but pretty much you had to go and be in a gang, just
Yeah.
to hang out. I mean,
it's
it was
like-
not really like a choice.
Yeah.
It's like literally that or you stay inside.
Yeah,
So you're
it's
like,
like-
I'll join the gang.
Yeah, it's like the local Boys and Girls Club.
It's
like-
literally the local Boys and Girls Club.
Yeah.
Yeah, it is. And like, because everybody's trying to impress their big brother, big sister,
Mm-hmm.
who's in the real gangs. And so those kids took the lead in
Yeah.
doing these gangs. And then the rest of us, we just really wanted to play.
Yeah.
You know what I mean?
Yeah,
A
yeah.
lot of times. And that was, so that was the thing. But yeah, and that's where I learned to, or I mean, I don't know where I read this, but that a lot of first generation Latinos move through their identity and the culture of being a Latino and going into like hanging out in upper class and middle class people and bouncing and maneuvering through the culture like it's nothing. You know what I
Yeah.
mean? It's not like, I don't have to like change. I mean, it's how that happens is very fast.
Yeah,
You know?
and I think it sort of does speak to our identity as Latinx people and how some of us have like a proximity to whiteness that we like. They're like, oh, you guys are just like one of us, like they really like
Yeah.
don't mind us as much as if like our skin was darker, we were black people, or if we were a different sort of foreign to that, because again it's like we're the nannies, we're the gardeners, we're and then even other Latinx people are are closer in proximity to white people and can sort of maneuver those areas a little easier.
Yeah, and then you have to maneuver, obviously, and you don't know, but you don't even know that that's happening.
Yeah.
You don't know that you don't know that later you'll have to really maneuver that, right?
Yeah.
Or that's an asset, and
Yes.
that's like where we are now.
Yeah.
But like then you just start doing that because that is because you're in those communities. You know what I mean? And so yeah.
And sort of talking to your parents you're like, your mom was an immigrant. Are there a lot of like Salvadorians and Colombians in Long Beach? Like, how did your identity, your Latinxness fit into that?
There might be. I have no idea.
Yeah.
Yeah, well, there was I got a lot of El Salvadorian, love influence in my early years. I think my mom had a lot of friends who were El Salvadorian and Latin influence in general in my early years, from like 1 to say 6, 7, I don't know, but that's when I remember it. And there was a lot of, whether it was my babysitters, whether it was some of her friends, foods that were made around the house, or her friends. I had a cousin who and a few cousins who like lived with us or stayed with us, and so I did get a lot of that. I think I spoke Spanish the first like few years of my life, so I got a lot of really nourishment, you know what I mean, in my culture really early on, and then it kind of just expanded, and it was less of that. My mom was managing this bowling alley, so around, I mean, I'm probably not sure the age, but 7 or 8, it really became more of a melting pot, and like the bowling alley was like this magical place for me where, my mom was the manager, so I got to like run around like a little nightmare there, running around playing all the video games for free, and bowling and pool. And within that, I was making all these other friends of all these other races, colors, and so that was the hugest learning lesson for me in my life. Honestly, that was the start of it.
And so like you were talking about like you would go to like punk shows and like Sublime parties, like what was sort of your like scene and like identity like through high school, like how did you see yourself? How did other people see you as?
Yeah, that was a weird one. That was a weird pivot. So up until junior high, I had basically gone to a private school, and it's a Baptist school. So it was, I kind of grew up with the same kids, and there was only one of us. There was one brown, two brown, one Asian. He might have been in the brown. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
We're all brown, and one black kid. White kids, and but we all grew up from kindergarten to 7th grade together. So we just were this microcosm, and I was just like the token brown guy, but not necessarily in a bad way yet. But what's interesting is that after that, I moved to a high school that was primarily Caucasian, and my mom wanted me to go to like a really, like the best like public school in the area.
Yeah.
So we moved just across the bridge to Seal Beach, Los Alamitos, where they had a really great school, Los Al High, and the football team was like rated top in the nation. And it was a beach town. That was more of a beach town than Long Beach.
Yeah.
I mean, it was a surf town.
Yeah.
So you had that surf element. You had suburbs. You had, and it was a much different breeding ground. So, so I think that I took that token brown guy thing with me from that private school where it was nurtured.
Yeah.
And I don't know that it was nurtured like that in high school. I think it became something else, or I used it, or it was used. I mean, I had a lot of friends who were like low-key racist, people, or, and I knew a lot of Aryans. I knew a lot of skinheads because of the punk thing, everything go. And then that was the other part of it. So like between the punk kids and then the kids at my high school, there was like, the kind of what you were saying before, like, oh, Jason's cool though. I get him. Like he's not like whatever, like the stereotype.
Yeah.
He's not a stereotype, and he's down.
He's like us.
He's like us guys.
Like, he's not like them, like the people we have prejudice and stereotypes against.
And I used to go, and then but if sometimes when people want to like score certain like weed or something like that, I would be that would be where the token thing is. They'd come to me and I would go and get it for my white friends.
Yeah, like go talk to your people.
Yeah, go talk to your people. Go get us a bag because like we can't, or we're afraid, or like whatever.
Yeah, they're afraid.
You're happy to do it because you're like stoked. You want to be one of them. You want to hang out, and you just want to be cool, or you want to hang out.
Everyone loves the guy that brings the weed.
He's the best, right? And you needed a way in. So between that and being funny, I wasn't exactly a jock at all. So between that and like being funny and stuff, those were kind of my ways in to this new like kind of like society and culture, and there was a spectrum of healthy and unhealthy of that.
And it's interesting to hear the difference between elementary school where you're not super aware of the differences, and then when you go to like a different neighborhood that's got like prestige and a different sort of economic like difference, how you can begin to feel othered because of the neighborhood you're from, the color of your skin, where your parents are from. That isn't the dominant culture that's you're being required to perform.
Yeah, and we had barely been able to afford to get into that neighborhood. So I remember feeling like, oh man, like these. There was like a lot of times when I couldn't afford what everybody else was gonna go do. Oh, we're gonna go on a ski trip. I'm like, oh, this is some white people shit. I cannot do this. You know what I mean? I could do one of the 9 times you're gonna do it.
Yeah.
But not every single adventure.
Yeah.
You know, I'm sure there's a lot of kids who have that, and from different colors. But specifically, I was feeling it from this, and I was like, so yeah. So that was a thing. That I remember. Those were like times when I remember the difference.
Yeah, yeah, and like, because I know sometimes I have people in my family who don't like when we use like white people shit, like owning boats and skiing, but it's sort of like the shorthand way of saying, it's predominantly white people that do it because the economics is more available to them.
Yeah.
And if you go do these things, if you go look at the boating licenses and go on the ski trips.
Let's go look at the boating licenses. Yeah. Okay.
And you go to the ski resort, you're going to see a certain type of person.
Yes.
And that's exclusionary. It feels exclusionary because you're the only one there, of your kind there. And it also feels exclusionary because it's sort of been provided to this one type of people.
Yeah. And to maybe go back a minute, I will say this to toot my own horn there, is like me and my best friend, who's a white dude, white kid, and we grew up in the same area in Long Beach, and but we went to the mountains. We were very much LA kids. Like we went to Mammoth and we went to Snow Summit. We went, but we weren't snowboarding. We were skiing because people didn't snowboard yet. I'm old. So, but we went skiing since I was like kind of a little kid. Yeah. And so I had already been doing all that, like quote unquote white people shit. I had already been doing that with my friends. So by the time I got to high school, that was a perfect another perfect way in for me to be like, oh no, like I am like one of you, like you're one of me, you know what I mean? Like I've been on these mountains since day one, and that was how I saw it. I didn't. So
yeah, exactly. Like it's because people can sort of interpret that to be like, oh well, then people don't. If something is called white people shit, then us as brown people don't believe we can do it,
right.
It's exclusionary to us, but
I did believe I was already doing it.
Yeah.
And so I
just sort of the practice and the culture of it. And
it is a shorthand. Yeah. It's probably a bad shorthand too,
I use it constantly, but I do give people my case about it, but I'm like, that little phrase that might be triggering to some Caucasian people embodies so much of the struggle of like people of color on what's been available to them historically, and
well, they should ask themselves next time they go on a ski trip, how many brown people did I invite on this trip?
And you'll have that
then
conversation.
See how many you had invited. Well, they don't go, or I didn't think they went.
Or we saw 3, and it's like, okay,
if you have
3 out of,
if you look in your group right now, white people, and you have more than one, then this is not about you. Yeah. But if you did not invite any of them because you have these other reasons, then you might be in that category.
Yeah, and it's this whole thing of just like, if you point out race to white people, then there's somehow feel culpable, but it's so beyond like what their personal choices were, and more of the like society and how we condition each other and how the money is.
It's not that, and a lot of times, like you said, it's not even like, it's not personal.
No, it's not.
It's not like they set out to like do it that way,
But this is instead of taking it as an opportunity to examine their world and the races in their world and how they interact with them, they immediately get out on the defensive to be like, but I didn't do anything, and it's like, I'm not accusing you of anything,
I'm not accusing you of anything. Yeah, exactly. I'm not accusing you. I think that's
But it just comes from like from that defensiveness comes from just how little they have maybe thought about race or asked themselves certain questions, or you point out a blind spot, they're gonna get uncomfortable because they feel like, whoa, like what did I do? Like
I think people. Like people don't want to think about race, and it's a weird thing. Like, oh well, now if I change who I am or my approach to quote unquote, we're just going to use inviting more brown people to my skiing. Yeah. So now that's basically me saying, oh, I'm guilty of this.
Yeah.
Like, no, it's not. It's just it's you taking a step back and saying, oh, like I honestly might have a really good time with this person and that person to go on that trip with now. You know?
And let's say you invite all your brown friends, and maybe a lot of them will be like, sorry, I can't afford it. And then it's like, okay,
Right.
and what does that mean that I and all these other white people can afford it? You know, like.
Right. Then you're like, well, I asked them all, they couldn't afford it. You know,
Yeah,
and it's
it's
like,
just
yeah. So it's a thing, and then it's not your fault. And
Yeah.
again, so it isn't their fault. And even if they, I think a lot of them. I mean, we're just using this as an example.
Yeah.
Now, you know what I mean? But had asked me all the time. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Hey, you want to go? You want to go to this? You want to go to that?
Yeah.
They asked me plenty of times. You know, and I was like, no, I can't afford it. You know what I
Yeah.
mean? So then that slowly becomes, well, I don't want to embarrass him or her,
Yeah.
right? And ask them about stuff they can't afford. So I'll just leave them out.
Yeah.
Right. And then finally you can afford it. And you're like, where's my invitation now? I got the money. Right. So it's this weird, you know, it's not people's fault. Like,
No.
exactly, you know,
No. It's just like the result of like
It's a result.
of like a system that doesn't have equity, that doesn't really consider other factors into, you know, because again, like
that's what we say is white people shit. You know what I'm saying? Like,
And it's same thing with country clubs. You know, like
yeah.
people historically, people of color have not been allowed to join. So
Right.
that's another factor, and then not even to get into the economics. So there's not even a culture of it in the same way that there is with white people, because it was from the start they were like, no, you're not allowed here. So that never developed. So it couldn't be brown people shit, because for some of these things we just weren't allowed to be in it.
Yeah, we weren't from the get. We weren't,
Yeah.
you know, and now we're like, oh, but we're coming out. You know what I mean?
Yeah. All right. So now let's get into what you did after high school. Like, what did you do? Sort of, what was the plan? You know?
Oh Lord, the plan, the big plans. Well, high school. So all that stuff was going down. I was still playing music. I was on the football team, and then I started going to raves. And so I became this huge raver / DJ, and it was like kind of the second wave of like rave culture. And it was the reason I starting there because we're talking about music too, you know, and like I honestly do feel like it was like a hippie movement of a new generation, and I was doing a lot of, and this all kind of wraps back into writing really, but I fancied myself a poet, kind of a poet, and I didn't know that I was a writer of short stories and a poet, and I was acting a lot at that time, going up to LA to take workshops from like professional teachers. And then I was getting into the rave culture. So that kind of all of those things were happening. And so then I basically did that up until, you know, maybe 20. I left school, and I was DJing. And I just basically like did all of that. I was kind of in a little whirlwind of being and I was a bit of a troublemaker, I think, you know. I was a little bit of a rebel at that time. That was my high point of rebellions. So I was seeking that out, and I was also just like trying to find out who I was through these different identities, because I knew that like whatever this had happened through high school and whatever that spectrum of vision was very closed. And I started doing a lot of hallucinogens and tripping out, and kind of in this like total, like I kind of thought of myself as like a new age hippie, and fancied myself in these Morrison very romanticized versions of of things, and was looking for, I mean, and that movement was, it's all about like peace, love, and unity and respect. And I was like all about that. I was, and I still am really, but I was so that was wonderful for me because I felt stifled by whatever high school shit was being fed to me. And I kind of like the aggression of punk wasn't enough. And it was like there was a lot of violence that I was seeing in that wasn't necessarily all of me either. Yeah. So between those two worlds, I wanted to make a new home for my mind, and that's where I sought it. And so, so that brought me to that somehow brought me to San Diego, because I at that point looked at my acting and I said, well, I don't want to be a Hollywood actor. Like there was a lot of there was some opportunity to kind of go down this road of being like kind of a kid actor, and I decided like against it basically. And I said, I want to be like a thespian and known as like, maybe one day be a Broadway actor or be a theater actor. And when I do Hollywood and I do movies, I want to be like a very serious actor. So I moved to San Diego and I studied there, and majored in this theater company that was like fantastic, and it was my family. And I did that for about 3.5 years, graduated, and just absorbed writing. I absorbed directing, and I absorbed acting. And so I was there from about 20 to 25.
And what did your mom think of this whole time?
Around that time, I think she was glad I went to college, because she couldn't get me to get to college when I was 18. Yeah. And I was wiggling around. And I'm actually really glad she moved to San Diego. I was still in Long Beach, and she said, well, why don't you just come to San Diego and stay with us and go to college over here, And I said, what am I going to do over there? You know what I mean? I'm like, Yeah. And she said, well, there's like this whole like, theater and acting here. And she got me, and I was like, oh, really? I'm like, oh, okay. So just go and just do art stuff and act and get away from Long Beach and LA, which was kind of quickly eating at me, so I knew that I better go and do something. Yeah. So I did do that, and that was fantastic. Yeah, that was like a huge level up and awakening. All the great theater, just the community is always such a life changer.
And what about your brother? What was he up to at this time?
And my brother was juggling his second and third child. So he was over here in Long Beach, doing the family thing. Yeah. And he was doing the family thing, and I was doing like the artsy boy thing, That's and funny. Yeah, so we're still on way different paths at that point. But we were coming back around for
yeah. And that is interesting. Do you ever wonder, do you ever look at your brother and how he moved here at 18 and wonder if see that as a slice of the life you maybe could have had if you stayed in El Salvador, if your mom had stayed there, and if that had been your journey?
Oh, if I see, when I see him, how him, the family now? Or you mean, what do you mean?
Just in the sense that, because, I think about the life that maybe I could have had if my parents had stayed in Mexico.
Sure.
Do you ever see your brother as sort of like a preview of what maybe could have happened if you had grown up in El Salvador?
I mean, in some ways I can say that I'm jealous of him because, I look up to him a lot, in terms of the way he is with his children, and he's a great father, great husband. He's so, and he's he's a super, he's a soccer, he just nonstop watches soccer, you know what I mean? So he's like a classic, he's a classical Salvadorian, and so I look at him that way, and I feel like I feel like the shame of not knowing Spanish, or or someone accuses me of not being ingrained in my culture enough.
Yeah.
Then I was like, and I look into his life. I'm like, oh man, I wish it came so easy for me, but it didn't, like, in that way.
And it's crazy that so many of like immigrants or like children of immigrants do feel some type of shame that they're not closer to their culture. Even though the whole
there's a lot of that.
Even though the whole point of their parents coming here was to sort of like make a better life that wasn't like the life they had lived and they had left behind.
Yeah, it's a weird thing that we do to each other, which is like this, like like, all the people who are doing that to us and stuff, and then we're like, and I always say, like, my mom came here. My mom practiced her English on me. Mm-hmm. She would come home and practice, so that she looked the part, played the part. Yeah. She's a boss. She had to be a boss. She didn't need to have anybody second guess her, while, she has a different accent. Mm-hmm. I think it's something she's the most proud American, you could possibly think of.
Yeah. And it's also, because it is that thing of, you're not like Latinx enough. Like, I get sometimes, like,
you get that.
No, I get like you're not Mexican enough, and I'm sure you get that, with like. Oh
God, yeah.
But it's also, it sort of like discounts the journey of our parents, our own journey of you can be Latinx and still be the product of your life, your journey. Like, like one definition of being El Salvadorian, coming here at 18 isn't more valid than your parents coming here, you growing up in Long Beach and being this, like, punk and then hippie raver kid. Like,
right.
That's all.
That is the dream for them. Like, that's the dream that I did.
And that's all part of the spectrum. Like, the spectrum is more complex and a result of choices and journeys and migration that we have to, like, acknowledge is just as valid, because we're sort of putting the blame on, like, first generation, second, third of not carrying the tradition when they are sort of starting their own journey. Like, they're like, we have to, like, see validity in that identity, that you can be, half Colombian, half El Salvadorian, grow up in Long Beach, and that is a valid journey. That is and I say this all the time, like, if there's one of you, there's at least a million of you. So it's,
I think there's a thing of, like, there is a balance that each individual has to make of their own, and each family, that, we are trying to level up. Mm-hmm. I mean, really, we are trying to level up. We are trying to level the playing field. Mm-hmm. And, and doing that while taking your culture with you is extremely important. Mm-hmm. But in no way is that's unilateral. Yeah. Right? It's not like a ladder that you have. I'm going to take my backpack full of culture with me, and I will bring that every step, every piece of my story will be infused with that culture. Yeah. It's I get to this place and I can reflect, and, if I punk, okay, well, I don't have to be in the, like, I wasn't part of the Latin punk movement that was huge in that time. I mean, I was just part of more of even the Aryan race and all these other punks. Yeah. So I didn't have to take my culture into that pocket of my life. I mean, in my writing, it makes sense for me now to put that in there, but what comes first for me is usually the character, the story, the first gen American viewpoint. And then, I mean, I always, when people we have that conversation about the shaming of the language, and I'm just like, I'll tell, like, if it's a guy or someone, like, do you know how to dance? Do you know how to salsa? Do you know how to do this? And they'll be like, no. I'm like, I do, and I'm pretty good at it. I'm like, do you know how to cook, like, authentic food? You know what I mean? They're like, no, I don't cook, bro. I'm like, I do. Yeah. You know what I mean? So, like, who's what? You know what I mean? Yeah. So this whole shame thing is, like, ridiculous a lot of times.
And it's also, like, how you described it as, like, leveling up. It's like we're trying to, like, move upward economically, socially, and also in a world that is very not designed for us. So So again, like, you be staying close to your roots or bringing everything that from your native country with you, the system's not working for that to be easy. It's working for to forget your language, for you to
Right.
like assimilate, for you to be as American in quotations as possible. So, and then we blame each other for that. We're like, oh, you don't know this? Like, well, it's not like they teach Spanish in our schools, and I've been taught Spanish consistently every day for 18 years. Like,
Right.
what did you expect was going to happen?
What did you think was going to happen? Yeah, exactly.
So how long did you stay in San Diego?
I stayed there from about 5 years.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, 5 years.
And then you moved back to Long Beach?
Then I moved into LA. I moved. I lived. I went actually from there. I went to film school. So I finished theater, got the degree, did a year or two more of like DJing, and I think I had cold feet to get back into like, LA, and I was just like, oh my God, it's gonna eat me alive. I better get, and I can't. So then I went back and I decided to go to film school, and moved back at 25.
Okay. And what like motivated you to go to film school in the first place?
Oh, a lot of things. I mean, a lot of things motivated me. Mostly out of all the stories and of everything I learned from theater and from my acting career, I was like, okay, that's when I really started to recognize that, like, okay, I have all these stories and mine are, but I don't know how. And I was very well maybe read or I had seen a lot of films. I had a in terms of like aesthetics and theories of filmmaking and storytelling, and certainly of acting and performances, and some sense of writing and all these things.
Yeah,
I had a lot of that, but I was terrible at computers and terrible with tech or cameras, any of that, and so I just really went to learn programs and tools, and I was like, I wasn't the type to be like YouTubing thing. I mean, or YouTube wasn't really a thing yet, So, but like, I wasn't the type to like sit there and learn from YouTube. Like, I needed a teacher to teach me these things. So I went to film school primarily so they could teach me to make those stories happen, and I would sneak into the visual effects classes. I would sneak into the animation classes. I was like so hungry to learn every facet of the process.
And sort of like what stories did you want to tell? Like what like the stories you even right now? What is like? Do you have like a theme that sort of keeps coming up?
I mean, underdog is always like, is there no Latino who's not doing underdog? Like, we are underdogs, man. But underdog is probably underneath all of these. I think that. Let me back up a second. I will say this. Originally, what I wanted to do was tell any story I wanted to tell, but with Latino in it. Yeah. I mean, that's like the dream, really, and I still believe in that dream. Yeah. And now I feel like it's getting a lot better, but economically and where we are in the market, like, we're not there. And as a business model, and this is like off tangent, but it really has to do with looking at how to even write these things or where to put your energy. So now my task is a little bit more strategized in that, and I look at the genres that are working for Latinos, and I look at the construct of that and try to fit in there somewhere. Yeah. Because that honestly is something that they don't teach you, And in terms of the theme of that, they all, like, I did a short that had called Timid Pimps, and it was about two nerds who were mama's boys, and one was a white dude and one was a Latino, and they were like, they're very much like kind of modern day feminists. They're like grew up with a single mom, and so they're little sweethearts there, and they are forced out to be, and they decide to become street pimps. So so I think this balance of masculinity and femininity is something that I find really fascinating, because I grew up with a lot of women and I grew up with a single mom.
Yeah.
So for me, I've always been, like that. So when people, I don't know. I think I lean more into my femininity a lot of times than my masculinity, and those vary. So I like telling stories that make people dance around in that space, you know what I mean, and not be afraid to be vulnerable in that space. And I think it's a good time for that, so that is really intriguing for me. Stuff that has I grew up reading Stephen King books, so I watched every single horror movie in the world, and those were the initial things that made me want to make movies. Even though now I was like, I'm not gonna try to make monster movies. I was like, I'm gonna make like art house movies, and then I was like, oh well, nobody's buying an art house Latino movie. You know what I mean? If you haven't noticed,
it's a tough market.
Okay, it's a tough ass market, and like Roma, is like, don't look at Roma because Roma's Roma because of so many things, right? And that is up like a political success too, and Netflix, I mean, there's so many, but and God bless you if you want to try to do those, you know what I mean?
Yeah.
And I'm still fighting my instinct to want to do that. And maybe I'll come back to maybe doing more things like that. But that's what I mean about finding topics and finding places where it works.
Yes.
And also so it's oddly tactical now, it's oddly tactical. And I only say that mostly because I'm just now learning it. And I've made a lot of movies and helped other people make movies. I've produced movies. I've been a script supervisor for 10 years. So I've been on like 80 films. And so I see what's going, what's not going. And for other writers who are trying to get work, who are trying to get seen, and they're like, I just want to tell my passion. I want to tell my, like, take your passion and turn it into a business model and look at what is being, and it's kind of a tangent, you know what I mean? But it's more to the point of what I'm writing, you know what I mean? Like what I'm writing is I'm hopefully writing things that make sense, that people want to see now, not just what I want to see, but what others are going out to see.
Yeah.
I think So probably genre, somewhere where genre meets, and then I'll sneak my art house vibes in there. You know what I mean?
Yeah. Because it's a good thing to speak on that. The goal is to have like Latinx people in every role, in every genre, sort of to be interchangeable without making it a big deal or pointing it out or making it central to the story. But we are in a place where we have to be very purposeful with our representation, with what sort of stories we want to tell and how and what genre and what's gonna also be a good model to motivate the next piece of work, if you have like a great primetime HBO or like an HBO series like Game of Thrones with all Latinx people, then that changes the game,
Sure.
Change that they're gonna make 5 more of those on 3 other networks.
That changes the game, right?
Yeah.
But then where are those books?
Yeah, exactly.
Right? And do we have the power to buy that book?
Yeah.
Right? Who's buying that book? And then and when those things happen, or as they happen, it's great. Like right now, like they're buying. Oh my God, there's like 3 or 4 Latinx family shows that just got bought and are made, and so people are all about like, oh, let's brown people, and somebody says this to me that I thought was really clear. It made sense to me. So is that I've been fighting this, I feel like kind of kicking and screaming, what I mean, for like so many of us, and they said to me, well, look, if you look at like Black history in film, it goes way back, and we go way back, but it started really taking off with these very, like easy, low hanging fruit, likable movies.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? That now today seem like almost a little ridiculous, right? But you had like Scary Movie, right?
Yeah.
Which is like, and African Americans came in droves, and a lot of people came in droves to see that movie because it was like, you know what I mean? They didn't, but that's a black movie. You know what I mean? That was a black movie for black people, for everybody.
Yeah.
But for black people, and they came and they represented, and then you've got Tyler Perry goes to China, goes to Christmas, and like again, like kind of a ridiculous premise,
But you see clear results. You see the box office, and that sort of feeds the next level.
And African Americans came and represented, and what I don't see Latinos doing the same type of community now. They're like, I'm El Salvadorian. I'm not Guatemalan. I don't represent, we're different.
Yeah.
Like, and I hope that we do less of that.
Yeah.
And like, just consider it all one for like a while, if not forever. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Because really it's as easy as that in terms of like, we all move forward when we start thinking that way.
Mm-hmm.
And, so right now it's like Narcos movie, Narcos this. There's like 9 different Narcos Escobar things. I'm like, so you got into this room, you sold all these movies. Like, I don't like any of that. Oh, you've got a Pablo Escobar, goes to Texas. Yeah, we love that. So that works. The drug thing, right?
Yeah,
that's endless. So if you can fit that model and take your dream nugget and put it in that model somehow without, that sounds terrible, but that's movie Chicano that just came out and Lowriders. People like apparently, and La Lorena, all 3 of those are like kind of this sounds bad to say it like this, but they are our Scary Movie. They are our Tyler Perry. They're doing huge at the box office, and our people love that shit. They're like, I'm about that, and this is our culture. So
and I think you're right too, like, because there are a bunch of cartel shows on, they're like La Llorona, and again, the thing with all those programs too is we have to make sure that the directors, writers, executive producers, showrunners, the whole staff of writers on those shows are Latinx. Yeah, because for like Narcos, that's not always the case. Like, I was reading,
oh really?
An article. One of the Vida writers, it was like on this 4th season when she 3rd or 4th season when she joined Narcos, and she was the only Latinx writer in the room.
Wow.
Yeah, and there's a couple Netflix shows.
Oh my god. That
are like Spanish speaking for Spanish speaking countries that are written in America by white people, like La Llorona, the lead is a white female lead. Her last name, I think, is Garcia. But they really had to work to make her a white woman when it was so naturally a Latinx story, And
and BT Dub, shout out. I love Linda Cardellini.
I do too.
That to me is like the best. And she's the best. But
a missed opportunity for actors, for writers, for directors, for producers that will, because again, with the Tyler Perry example, he runs the whole thing.
He runs the show. Right.
So and he goes out. He's based in Atlanta. He goes out of his.
You know who he hires?
Yeah.
I mean, he mixes it up. I'm sure Shonda Rhimes mixes it up. But they definitely start with representing their people. I mean, but here's the thing. As much as I'm not about what happened there with like La Lorena, but if you put 2 like Mexican women, right, in that story, who would go to see it then? Yeah, would our people go? And who would go? Would enough people like Saw or Conjuring? Yeah. So who's paying for that? Like, who's investing in that? Yeah. And like that. Yeah. So that's where we get stuck.
Yeah, we also have to show up for our stories are, and we
have to show up for our stories.
Yeah, we have to show up for ourselves. Okay, so you mentioned that you've been a script coordinator for 10 years.
Yeah, supervisor. Yep.
Supervisor. Mm-hmm. Sorry. How did you get into that? Like,
basically, just by accident. I was going to film school, and then this it sounds like a scary story. Like this old creepy man, I went to like a Cinegear, which one is one of these like tech tool film conventions, right? Of all the new gear and swag. So I went over there, and this guy said, "Hey, do you want to be in this contest for script supervisor school?" Mm-hmm. I'm like, "Yeah, what exactly is script supervisor?" And they said, "Well, it's the continuity." And they said, "If you're an actor and a director, and even a writer, like." You'll be right there next to a director. You get to work with the actors, work right next to the director, work with the producers. They're hanging out there. Everybody, and you're really there on the A team. And you can kind of skip a lot of the kind of other kind of work. And I was like, oh yeah, because I'm like not a grip. I'm not like made to do grip. So I'm like, run cables. So I'm like, this sounds good. Like it's a brainiac thing. Yeah. And like I said, you get to hear all these wonderful conversations with director and cinematographer, talking about the words, changing the words. So as a writer, so I put the thing in the hat, and I won school. This is the only time I won something. I won more school. So I went to film school in the week, and then on the weekend I went to my script supervisor school, and then I went to my theater company at night. So that was how I got into that, and it was such a great way to get in the door, because a lot of people in my film school didn't know how to do any of that. We didn't teach it. And so that was just, I honestly am just now understanding, as I'm transitioning into more, like basically doing acting, writing, directing, and now using all three muscles at the same time, I'm now really realizing how much of an education that's been for me. I mean, I in a practical way, I'm like, oh wow, like I don't even know what I know in terms of like, and it's been really exciting to see like what that all is, because you're just really learning so much doing that job.
I mean, you can't underestimate the years of on-set experience where you're just absorbing it just through being there, on how it's supposed to work,
Just problem solving. You just problem solve all day with these guys and these girls, and you're in the huddle. So and certainly as a writer, I think that I think other writers. So anyway, I'm excited for that.
Yeah. And so like, how would you like describe your like sort of writer's journey in LA? Like how, since you finished film school, like how would you describe that journey? When did you really like start to like hone that in as a craft?
I would say the last 5-6 years. I mean, I in film school, I wrote some really crazy stories, and then and they seemed to gel. They were pretty well received, and I had made this short film that I wrote that was actually like a Native American horror movie, and it won like top film. It was like they said, "Oh, this is like the top film of the school," like, and so that actually was the lesson that I'm just now kind of coming back to, where I'm like, oh wow, like so you can tell a cool genre story about like Latinos or Native Americans, and that people will like it, and that can be done. You know what I mean? Like that can be done, and you don't have to like crap on your people to do it. You know what I mean? Yeah. Like this is awesome. Yeah. Like so that's always where I'm trying. That's where I'm trying to get to. And so that happened, and then I worked as a writer's assistant for like an Emmy-nominated comedy writer, Lance Casey, and he had written for like Politically Incorrect and for Cat Dog and like all these great shows, and Spawn, the movie he helped for, write some of that. Cool. So just like some really cool things that, as like a comic book person, as a cartoon person, and I was like, oh, cool, like this is like a real writer, man. You know what I mean? And he came from the kind of Harvard National Lampoon era, the like guys for like the Conans and the Simpsons, and just really like what makes like the foundation of a lot of writers now. So to learn, alongside him, and I did that for about 4 years. So that, getting my bar heightened, all the time. He's like, that no. And no. You know what I mean? So that that got me into a new bracket where I was like, kind of like, right now I'm an actor who like fancies himself like a writer, you know, who romantically a writer. And then now I'm going to be, the way I know I put my art in acting, I'm going to have to do that for writing. So I did that for about 4 or 5 years. And then I started the past 2 or 3 years really honing that, all of what I've learned from that. And now dialing it in. And now, you know, now I'm here.
And so let's talk about, like, what are you working on now? Like, what's things that are interesting you, things that you want to, like, are on the horizon? Any, like what's your current state as, you know, like a writer?
The current state, man, current state. It sounds so scary that way. The current state is things are getting fun. I mean, I'm kind of just trying to I'm trying to get in this huddle with the community of Latinx. This has been like so great to kind of been able to connect with all these people, and on Twitter. This is like, for some of us, I think you agree, like this couldn't have been a better thing, even though despite why it's happening, which will ultimately lead to a really great new foundation for all writers. So that's been awesome. And so that's the current state, is trying to find my place in all that. And because I was about to go and look for manager. I just kind of gotten all my ducks in a row. I've written like 2 pilots, and I've got my feature that are, you know, get off the ground. And so I was like, okay, here we go. Let's get an agent, get a writer. I'm like, oh wait, okay, so there's this now. So let's okay. So now we're like all of us trying to figure out what that all means. And I'm basically trying to find different projects for different levels, and looking at media and trying to do like different projects for different, you know, things. I mean, I have the 2 TV shows, and those are samples, and writing. I just wrote like a Barry spec that I'm finishing up and applying for like all the competitions and the fellowships. I have a micro budget feature which is based in East LA, which is about which is basically like a music movie about a guy who basically was in a punk band, and then he loses his best friend in the punk band due to like drugs and partying and whatnot, and he blames himself. He gives up music for good. He feels like he's been reckless. And now we find him basically like in rehab and talking with a therapist, and he's trying to resolve some of his own self-sabotage. He's trying to forgive himself, and also trying to be accountable for his own mental health, and for which is something I think that's really important in Latin community. We don't, especially like the men, we've been brought up in kind of a machismo situation, a lot of us, and some of us have had none of that. So basically a lot of, like I said back before, I do like to talk about masculine and feminine. And so I think he is trying to grow up and be a man on his own terms, without succumbing to machismo stuff and saying like that doesn't work for me, and representing the women around him and being accountable in mental health, and then trying to be a rock star or whatever, you know, without getting triggered and trauma and PTSD, right? So that making it not so much a story about you know, the struggles of a musician. We know, I think there was so many great movies that way, but what I would like to do with that is talk about how hard it is in the mental health way, you know what I mean? And as all artists, like, self-care is super important, and it's not easy, and to be able to talk about it. And so that area dips into a lot of my projects. And then I have another script that is more magical, and it's about being a shaman. And one of the things that I had practiced is a form of shamanism. I'm not sure if you're super aware of shamanism.
A little.
So and but it's part of our heritage too, right? And and it's essentially healers who do. Back in our old Native American days, we had like the healer in the tribe. So and that healer went away, and the need for, and that person would be basically your doctor. That'd be, your therapist. That would be, kind of all those things. Mm-hmm. He'd be the storyteller. And then anyway, so I started practicing shamanism when I was like 20, and which is a whole other show, that story. but I started practicing that, and I saw a lot of crazy things and helping people cope with a lot of mental illness and traumas and stuff, doing that and helping people these kind of holistic methods. So so through that I saw some all kinds of stuff, and you get to cross paths with people who believe they're witches and people who are into dark magic and black magic, and
that's a whole other world.
It's a whole other magical freaky deaky world, man. And so I wrote a show about that, and I wrote a show it's magical, but it feels like real magic.
That's cool.
And I thought, God, there's so many fun things about magic on right now, and witches and stuff, right? But I was like, where's the Latino witches? Like, where's the brujas? Like, there's a little shows here and there, but like, again, not to take away from all those fun shows, but so much of like witch culture and healers that really comes from African American and from Native American and from like our people, like those stories, you know what I mean? Like witches, and that came like way later, you know what I mean? Like, so that tribal thing. So that's actually where I usually start in terms of like a unified front too. Like I like to like think of Latin culture that way, because I get away from the problems of like, oh, I'm from El Salvador, this person is from Guatemala. I'm like, we were healers, like we were like tribes people, you know what I mean? And like start from there, like if you're really talking about roots. So anyway, I think that's another important story to tell.
Yeah, that's cool.
Yeah.
And I also like how you sort of mentioned, this new sort of like awakening that's going on, I think, a lot on Twitter, where the dispute between the agencies and the WGA sort of broke down some of the barriers and the gatekeepers, and writers started working together and for each other, and in that the process opened up to an even bigger pool of writers. So it's fun to see, and I think I didn't plan the launch of this podcast.
Right. This is exactly right.
But this was a great opportunity to, the iron is hot for collaboration and for talking to each other and connecting and building community. So on that note, where can people find you? Like, what's your social media? People love what you're...
Please find me. Yeah. Go out there and find me and say hi. Well, I'm on Twitter. It's my name, Jason Avalos, Avalos. And I'm also on Instagram, same name with an underscore. I also have my film production company website, which is called theschoolhousepictures.com. And we are also like interested in other people's stories. I have like camera. I just bought this great new camera and gear. So I'm also looking to like really collaborate and help other people tell their stories, if they have web series or whatever content that they want. I'm kind of have a door kind of open right now for that. So feel free to reach out and, but those are some of the places to find me.
And who are some of like the Latinx writers that you admire, that you sort of have known or have just met, who you think are doing good work, who maybe I should interview? Any that come to mind?
Okay, so a few people that I've worked with is one is her name is Alex Perez. She's a LatinX writer. She's a great writer. I believe she's Cuban. I would keep an eye on her, maybe try to interview her. I think Danny Fernandez who's she does a lot of hosting. She has some, I think she has a TV show that she was pitching around that's getting some heat. Danny Fernandez, she's really fun personality and doing some like good work out there. I would say those are two to keep your eye out for.
Okay, cool.
Yeah.
And so in an effort to try to make this podcast as inclusive as ever, and also to like shout out the particular writer you are and who other people might also be, I like the guests to help me title their episode. So the prompt is, there's a prompt, don't worry.
Okay.
It's a blank Latinx writer. So you can fill in the blank, you can move the words around, just so when this episode airs, someone will see that and think, oh, that's like me. Let me, like, first of all, thank God there's someone else like me. Let me reach out. Or, you know, if someone's looking at all these episode titles and doesn't see someone like them, they're like, oh, they haven't heard a story like mine. So it's just sort of a good way to put the feelers out. So yeah, how something that encapsulates your story, your journey, who you are. Like,
I am a first gen, weird AF, magical